self-destroying cycles of like postmodernism, right, where you have like this cycle of vicious criticism where it just tears itself apart, right? Or the other, that's one extreme where it can go. The other extreme can be, the other radical is just a like a crystallization, right? The other absolute
Yes, yeah,
is
yeah,
complete, like
absolutely.
is just a complete stagnation and unassailable dogma, where it's just like the this is what the truth, this is what we study, this is what it is, and it is unquestionable, right? That's the other way. It either tears itself apart or it
Yep.
becomes uh I guess I'm trying to get crystallized, or like fossilized. I guess fossilized is the word I'm looking for, but it just calcifies is another word to describe it.
Sure. Ossifies is the
Ossifies.
one I
There we go.
use
That's the
usually.
one. Ossifies.
Yeah.
It ossifies.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So that mirrors that. I mean, that's a parallel to that thing we were talking about before that I won't go into any longer because you've heard it before. But this sort of poetry in the philosophical conversation where we're ever trying to chase a definition of truth that's elusive, and it always ends up at a crisis point where you have postmodernists or sophists or some group of thinkers, Humeans,
Mhm.
who basically are saying this thing is completely elusive. We may as well not even care about it anymore at some point. Maybe that Hume didn't go quite that far, but the other two groups certainly, and say, well, let's care about something else. Let's make it a power game. Let's win arguments. Let's
Well,
do
yeah.
something like that.
Well, that's seeking of truth, like that you're thinking about. I don't, and this is might be a fun analogy, but and you're probably aware of this, but um, in the Harry Potter books, right? The Quidditch game, the
Yeah.
like this the searching of the snitch,
Hmm.
right? Was that sort of that higher truth, right? Of
The
the good,
metagame.
and how it has to, it's always elusive, but you need
Yep.
to keep searching up for it until it, or for in order for the lower game to continue, right? It's also sort of like Peterson talks a lot about the game and the metagame, right?
Yes. Yep.
Right, and how you're
Well, it's
really
the
playing
eye
a
that
metagame,
floats. I'm sorry.
and
Go ahead.
yeah, it's the metagame, and Quidditch is sort of a represented or a representation of that game and metagame. Like there's the game that's being played with the knockers, and it's a very sort of more convention. It's played on broomsticks, but it's a more discernible and conventional game of like the sports game, sort of like I think of it as like soccer or hockey type game that you can sort of see the rules and you understand it implicitly. It has like a field to play on and so forth. But then there's this higher game that the seekers are playing at the same time, and the higher game has no discernible boundaries of field or anything. It can go anywhere, and you're searching for this impossibly elusive thing. But if you can, um, but winning the if you can win the higher the metagame, if you can win the metagame, then it basically resolves the regular game as well, right?
It's interesting. It's reminding me of a few things. I always like to think of it as the eye that floats above the pyramid, and I think that, especially for males, perhaps that there's a whole landscape of pyramids, of competition games, of cooperative games, of games where we have a certain aim, and you can kind of
Mhm.
be stacked up at the bottom, but you can get better and better and better at this thing. And to get really good, you kind of got to be good at an awful lot, right? Like Peterson talks about, the big hockey player who just gently goes into the penalty box when the 120-pound referee tells him he has to. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, you got to be a good sport. You got to make people want to play with you. You've got to be the sort of person who your teammates get better as they're playing with you. You've got to, if you really want to get to the top, you got to be a good showman. You got to be a good ticket salesman. You got to understand like the performance that's happening. You've got to understand how to relate to the community, not just your coach and your teammates and the other teammates on the opposite side and all this stuff. It's like, fine, by the time you get to the top of there, you're as close as you can be to something that's pointing to a generalizable principle that would be at the top of any of the other games other than hockey. You see what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah,
And so,
there's an underlying pattern to
yeah,
it,
part of the
right? That
problem is, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a specialized proficiency, but there's also a generalized proficiency that you're learning as well, right? Like when you play games, like there's something that is, it's like
being
learning how to learn, right? There's something.
right. Being good at playing games
Yeah.
is different than playing this game well.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Okay, good. And just like, okay, well, the further up you go, the more it's like, okay, I've got to be good at making other people want to play this game, because then I can be coaching people and more people will be interested and more people will be watching on TV and more people will be buying tickets and there will be more money in the sport, and that will open up more opportunities for other people to develop and to go to coach. It's like you're changing the world if you get anywhere near the top of that thing. But most people are stacked up at the bottom with something like, the game is fun and I'm trying hard to win this game right now. It's the whole how you play rather than winning the game type of thing.
But there's like, that's part of that is the Pareto distribution.
Yeah,
Right?
well, I mean, it's inevitable
then
that it would be that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's almost inevitable.
Well,
It's not surprising that pyramids are stacking at the bottom. Like it's physically required.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's not. Yeah, it's physically required, but it's and it also, it's not inherently a bad thing. And then, but and it's something just on that, like the strategy that you sort of highlight the generalizability of it. But there is like, and especially when you're, for young men starting out, focusing on getting really good at one thing is a good immediate strategy. Like just try and climb one pyramid.
Not as easy as you think.
Yeah, not as easy as you think.
You think it's about scoring this point or scoring more points, and it kind of is for a little while. It's like, I didn't mean to cut you off there. It's hard to figure out how to aim up. But what happens is, if you're trying to climb that pyramid, what's really happening is that you're learning to turn your attention this way, right? If you can think of like this all ties back in with the Quidditch thing, because I'm going to liken it to the eye that floats above the pyramid. It's not really the same game. It's not built the same way. You don't graduate in the same way. But what you see is that whether it's making more money or being good at philosophy or having lots of friends or playing video games well or basketball well or whatever the heck it is that a person has gotten interested in, a lot of the time they're focused on sort of like, well, I'm here and I'm definitely not on that lower level. And maybe they think about, well, how do I get to the next level up? But by the time you're actually able to climb, you have to be oriented up until finally the whole point of it is that it's pointing you to the thing that's above the pyramid in the first place. And it's from that perspective that you can really see, okay, so then the question is this: what's the highest thing we should be oriented towards? Right? So you say that the Quidditch game, there's this, what is it called? A snitch, a thing that you're trying to catch.
Yeah.
Snitch. Okay. Mm-hmm. Snitch. Okay. That's a mistake that men often make too. But it's okay. Go ahead. It's the snitch.
The thing that the thing from the Quidditch game that like the snitch, I think, is represented is like is that the truth is, our relationship to the truth is dynamic and elusive. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that actually the actual truth, the truth is actually eternal and infinite and living. But it's our dynamism that makes the snitch move, and something that we constantly have to be continuously sort of chasing and adjusting to.
I've never read the book, so is that the nature of the snitch is that as you move, that forces it to do the elusive thing?
Oh no. That's my interpretation of it. Like so that in the book, it's like the snitch is always they're chasing the snitch, but the snitch is like it's a small golden ball with wings, and it can fly anywhere. And so it doesn't stay on the game board. So they actually basically, you have to look around the world for the snitch, right? There's no boundaries to the game, right?
Sure.
Of pursuing the snitch, of that part of the game. And
it's completely off the board. It's not a part of the pyramid. It's floating above it. Yeah, absolutely.
But and it what was it?
So
the key thing, I think, but I think that what I was going to say just about our relationship to finding the truth, is that it's only our perception of the truth and the good that is it's our natures, it's our potentiality that causes, like, the truth is actuality, it's spirit, It's our potentiality that causes us to require this continual recalibration with the truth.
Of constantly getting closer, of greater intimacy. And I think the nature of all relationship is like that. It's not so
Well,
one of the things you're
so I just
go
want to
ahead.
stay on that because this is what I mean, it's not, it's constant recalibration. The calibration itself requires continual attention, and that's a continued, like my relationship with my wife. If I'm not, I can't just like, okay, I've married my wife, now we're in love and it's done.
Yeah,
Check that off the
exactly.
list.
That's
I can go
exactly
on
right.
and do other stuff now. But it's, so
Yep.
if I want to maintain that relationship, I have to be continually checking in with her and continually growing with her, and I can keep that communication going. And that's how the communion is maintained. So that, and because of that relationship, there's other relationships in my life I can't pursue because I have,
Sure.
because I have that, I have to put that attention in. Like it's, my attention, uh, uh, the
It's the
attention
nature.
it's the nature of the relationship, and it's the same thing
It's the nature of
with the
being
truth.
oriented.
Yeah, you have to,
If you're
we have to
oriented
maintain
towards this, by
calibrated. Yeah.
definition, you're not aiming in any other direction. Yeah, absolutely.
And that is that is in a sense binding, and that's what um I think that's what Gnostics and I find restrictive of with the truth, right? Is that if you're the temptation to rebel, part of the temptation to rebel from the natural order comes from the fact that, well, you have this potentiality, and you're constantly loving the truth constantly requires you to sacrifice that the potentiality, right?
It's pretty good. Okay, so we really dive into these things in years 2 and 3, and I'm glad we get to do it today because philosophy of religion is going to make us go deeper than some of the other sillier. I like this stuff with the little arguments about determinism and free will and everything, but this is fantastic. I've said things in other classes that would demonstrate how much I agree with everything you're saying, so there's no reason for me to repeat it all here. But yeah, I think that's dead on accurate, and I think that one of the ways I talk about it is, it's the difference, of course, between the truth being a personality and the truth being a proposition. And the philosophers who think they can wrap their words perfectly around the truth and completely own it, I've said it's like saying to your spouse, I've got you figured out. You couldn't possibly surprise me.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to be surprised next week if you say that to him or her. Like it's like that's not what the nature of relationship is. All right. We got a few people coming a little bit late, but we're going to get started.
Okay. Well, I
And we're
just
going
went
to
on one more thing on
go ahead.
that, right?
Yeah.
Is I think why the Trinity is expressed as three persons is because, like we were, I think we were mentioning this like last conversation. We were talking about the difference between like how you can compress symbols are truth bearing, right? They're metaphorical. They're patterns, and can hold so much truth. And then you have you have like just something like a simple symbol like water or blood, or you have more complicated. The more or a proposition is very simple, is relatively simple. It's precise. It's a precise tool, so it's very incisive, but it's also, it can't carry much. It's much truth, but you can have basically a hierarchy of concepts that our brain can capture that can and they can hold so much truth, like of patterns. There's a sort of like a hierarchy of patterns, and the highest patterns or the most complex patterns that we can possess in our minds as humans are relationships, our persons, our other people.
Yeah.
And the idea of I think the Trinity is, so it has, it's the deepest, is it's expressed as three persons because we're trying to express the concept of God, and it's the only way to express that is the three people with three persons with one substance, right? To sort of say that it's a larger whole than the greatest, like the most complicated thing that we can conceive of, which is a person, right? Or
okay, so I want to toss out something which might go along well with the way you're thinking here, and then get your response to it. So to me, water and agua are just signs. They're not really symbols. Maybe there's a little symbolism in the words we use, but the reason why they can be arbitrary is that they're not actually symbols. And when you say that symbol contains some truth, I think what symbols do is that they have something of the thing to which they are referring in them. You can have a direct encounter with the thing they're about by your encounter with them. And the reason why propositional philosophical syllogistic language of philosophers is insufficient for the thing we're talking about, which Socrates said on the day of his death. We've been doing all of that, but we've also been trying to orient ourselves properly, to relate properly. He said, relate properly to the source of all truth being justice, goodness, and love. As if knowing it like Adam knew his wife, knowing it in a personal sort of way was the closest we could come to those ultimate truths. That the reason why those two languages have their different domains is that art and poetry, sculpture, painting, music, these things contain within themselves something of the thing they're pointing at. And then the mythological, the mythopoetic stories that tell us about the personalities that make up our environment represent them as personalities, not as not as like a cartoonification, but because they're more like, as you said, patterns and personalities than they are like our concepts of objects or things around which we could wrap propositional sign language, like language that points at things rather than contains the essence of those things in them to some degree.
Okay. I mean,
So how
there's a
does that
lot
strike you?
there. There's a lot there. And so I don't know if I can really, like, there's a couple of things that I could comment on. Maybe let me try like a formulation that I think that I have that is similar and sort of like maybe we can compare and contrast. So yeah, I think you're absolutely like what I think is most right about that was like you're talking about that personal relationship with the transcendental, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that trying to maintain that. So something that like when I started getting a little bit more into Thomas Aquinas, something that struck me is that it's I think that is a complete inversion in the modernist mind is that spirit is the actuality and matter is the potentiality. Matter is what is completely changed.
Socrates agreed.
It's completely changeable, and form and for spirit as potential as actuality, as form is essentially unchangeable, right? Is eternal. So what we're trying to like that his argument or is the way that of looking at it that way is that we're looking for the true form, and God is the true form of being. So that is sort of that's the idea. It's the ultimate ideal. But it's and if we can we stay connected to that, like our connection to that, or the fruits of our connection to that is the truth, goodness, and beauty, right? Those are the fruits of that relationship.
Yeah.
So when we are expressing,
right.
yeah. So it's that connection to the truth, to the divine, which provides the truth, goodness, and beauty.
That's why ye shall know them by their fruits.
Yeah.
And it's also why to know him is salvation.
Yeah.
It's in other words, it's like as simple as this. So if you talk to like an adolescent or remember being an adolescent, you sort of, I remember when I was like in my teen years, I realized I kind of picked up on the personality traits of my friends, right? Because you're still moving from non-being towards the great I am, right? So you're in this potentiality becoming actual. That's just the definition of human life. Okay, fine. So what does it mean? It means hanging out with God allows you to pick up on the divine character traits. You can't have the fruit of the spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, long suffering, all of those things, unless you're hanging out with the one who is like that or who is that way of being. And then when you are, the proof that you are is that you demonstrate that you can demonstrate that you are just being, really, is
that your actions as
you're
being
just
in line with the
being
divine
that way, right? And it can't be like, well, here's a proposition, here's a set of rules, wag my finger, be more peaceful. And it's like, ooh, let me try. That'll prove I'm saved. It's like, no, I mean, it should be more like go hang out with God if he'll have you. And while you're wrestling with God, you'll discover that you're being transformed in this sort of person who is demonstrating that way of being in the world.
So, for example, I mean, on that, it's like you can, like Michelangelo making the statue of David and the Sistine Chapel is like you can, you I mean, you can argue about like the nature of his personal salvation and so forth, but you cannot deny his connection to the divine based
Oh,
on
that's interesting because of the beauty. That's interesting.
because of the beauty.
I've thought about ideologies and
It's not,
things
but it's
that
not just
don't
beauty, but there's the
produce
beauty,
art.
truth, and goodness in his art. Like it's not
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah. No, I understand. Yeah.
yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting. All right, I'm gonna have to think on that a bit. Okay, we have to get started because there's no way we're gonna do 5 classes on this one essay. So let's wrap it up on number 4, especially since usually we only do one. Although Plantinga is someone we're gonna spend a lot of time paying careful attention to in year 3, and we're gonna have other essays by him. So I've been playing this game with Grok where it teaches me how to speak in over-the-top Gen Alpha language. So what's poppin', my goated crew? We totally yeeted back to slay this wild debate of how believing in God in the big G is straight up properly basic. No Ohio vibes, all bussin'. So let's get into that and pretend like we're in some sort of Fortnite Waffle House 3 a.m. rave, and let's wrap this up. Let's do the simultaneous sip real quickly. So get your cup, your mug, your glass, your tankard, your chalice, your thermos, or your stein, your canteen, jug, or flask, your vessel of absolutely any kind, and fill it with your favorite liquid. I'm drinking some sparkling water with blueberry flavor in it. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes literally everything better. It's called the simultaneous sip, and it happens right now. Go. It's good stuff. Thank you, Lord, for the chance to come together and have some good conversations. Lights would help. Okay, section B of part 4. My claim, all right, now remember everybody, just to interrupt, I'm going to kind of read a little bit without too much pause. My claim is that belief in God is properly basic. It does not follow, however, that it is groundless. Let me explain. Basic versus groundless. Suppose we consider perpetual beliefs, memory beliefs, and beliefs ascribing mental states to other persons, such as I see a tree, or I had breakfast this morning, and that person is in pain. Statements like those. Although beliefs of this sort are typically taken as basic, it would be a mistake to describe them as groundless. Upon having experience of a certain sort, I believe that I am perceiving a tree. In the typical case, I do not hold this belief on the basis of other beliefs. It is nonetheless not groundless. My having that characteristic sort of experience. All right, so now we're finally getting into his actual arguments, which is great. I mean, he's been doing an awesome job of leading us through Reformed theology and what he got out of that, and atheism arguments and what he thought about all that. But okay, we're starting to see his arguments. First of all, basic doesn't mean groundless. Basic simply means to him, you don't need to argue to it. Okay. In the typical case, I do not hold this belief on the basis of other beliefs. It is nevertheless not groundless. My having this characteristic sort of experience, to use Professor Chisholm's language, my being appeared treely to, whatever experience I'm having that seems like the type of experience I have when I'm seeing a tree, plays a crucial role in the formation of that belief. It also plays a crucial role in its justification. Let us say that a belief is justified for a person at time A, at a time if A, he is violating no epistemic duties and is within his epistemic rights in accepting it, then, and B, that his noetic structure is not defective by virtue of his then accepting it. Take that as his definition. Then my being appeared to in this characteristic way, together with other circumstances, is what confers on me the right to hold the belief in question. This is what justifies me in accepting it. We could say, if we wished, that this experience is what justifies me in holding it. This is the ground of my justification, and by extension, the ground of the belief itself. If I see someone displaying typical pain behavior, all right, so I'm not gonna argue that he's correct or wrong. Let's just try to understand it for a moment. Some people might argue, well, you can know for sure that you're having a tree experiencing experience or a tree witnessing experience, but you don't know that there's a tree there because, like Descartes said, you could be dreaming and thinking there's a tree, but really you're in your bed. But what he's saying is, no, typically we don't think you have to argue that you're seeing a tree. You don't have to argue to it. You can just report it. And as long as accepting that belief doesn't mess up your whole noetic structure, or that let's see, he is violating as long as you're violating no epistemic duties, so you have an epistemic right to believe it, that we just say, okay, we'll just start there. Just tell me, what color is the litmus paper? You don't have to actually argue that you're able to see and that wavelengths exist and other things like that. Just have the experience and report it. The same with memories, and the same with the problem of other minds, he's going to say. But having the experience is what justifies me in saying not just that I'm having the experience, but in holding the proposition that it is true that I'm having the experience, right? So he's not saying a yellowness experience is happening in my mind, but maybe it's an illusion. He's saying as long as it's not an illusion, as long as it's grounded well enough, I can just simply tell you I see the tree. Okay. If I see someone displaying typical pain behavior, I take it that he or she is in pain. Again, I do not take the displayed behavior as evidence for the belief. I do not infer that belief from other beliefs that I hold. I do not accept it on the basis of other beliefs. Still, my perceiving the pain behavior plays a unique role in the formation of the justification of that belief. As in the previous case, it forms the ground of my justification for the belief in question. So he's got three distinctions here. He's got structural building ideas. Those are argued too. He's got foundational ideas. They're kind of like the stones that rest on the ground. And then he's got grounding. The same holds for memory beliefs. I seem to remember having breakfast this morning. That is, I have an inclination to believe the proposition that I had breakfast, along with a certain past-tinged experience that is familiar to all but hard to describe. Perhaps we should say that I am appeared to pastly, but perhaps that insufficiently distinguishes the experience in question from that accompanying beliefs about the past not grounded in my own memory. The phenomenology of memory is a rich and unexplored realm. Here, I have no time to explore it. In this case, as in the others, however, there is a justifying circumstance present, a condition that forms the ground of my justification for accepting the memory belief in question. It's great that we're reading Plantinga right now because we just started epistemology classes, and it's going along really well, right? In each of these cases, a belief is taken as basic, and in each case, properly taken as basic. In each case, there is some circumstance or condition that confers justification. There is a circumstance which serves as the ground of justification. So in each case, there will be some true proposition of the sort. In condition C, S is justified in taking P as basic. Let's write that down real quickly. In condition C, S is justified in taking P as basic. Okay? So obviously you could be wrong sometimes. You could have what you think is a grounded belief in a basic proposition, and someone could provide evidence that you're actually under an illusion or something. But given the right conditions, it is possible for a person to be justified in taking a proposition about their own memory, about the experience they're having in real time, or about their belief about other minds and the experiences other people around them might be having, as just not something I have to argue to. I don't have to prove it. I don't have to really find evidence to demonstrate it. I can just sort of start there, and it's proper to do so. So, I should have done this. Okay. Similarly, for memory, suppose I know that my memory is unreliable and it often plays me tricks. In particular, when I seem to remember having breakfast, then more often than not, I have not had breakfast. Under these conditions, I am not justified in taking it as basic that I had breakfast, even though I seem to remember that I did. So being appropriately appeared to in the perceptual case is not sufficient for justification. Some further condition, a condition hard to state in detail, is clearly necessary. The central point here, however, is that a belief is properly basic only in certain conditions. These conditions are, we might say, the ground of its justification, and by extension, the ground of the belief itself. In this sense, basic beliefs are not or are not necessarily groundless beliefs. Okay, we can see how someone might want to argue with this. But well, let's see here. This is interesting. Now, similar things may be said about belief in God. When the reformers claim that this belief is properly basic, they do not mean to say, of course, that there are no justifying circumstances for it, or that it is not, or that it is in that sense groundless or gratuitous. Quite the contrary. Calvin holds that God, quote, reveals and daily discloses himself in the whole workmanship of the universe, unquote. And the divine art reveals itself in the innumerable and yet distinct and well-ordered variety of the heavenly hosts. God has so created us that we have a tendency or disposition to see his hand in the world about us. Okay, this is very important. God has made us to be inclined to his fingerprint is somewhere in our psyche. It's somewhere in our spirit. Oh, sorry. Let me see this message here. Yes. Yes, that is correct, Roger. That's the essay we're reading. Okay, so this is really key to Descartes' whole argument, by the way, in Meditation 3. There's something, well, let's say it's at least analogous to it. There's something of the divine or the way the divine built me that I'm inclined to perceive his existence in a way that might meet the conditions of being properly basic. Okay. More precisely, there is in us a disposition to believe propositions of the sort, this flower was created by God, or this vast and intricate universe was created by God, when we contemplate the flower or behold the starry heavens or think about the vast reaches of the universe. Calvin recognizes, at least implicitly, that other sorts of conditions may trigger that disposition. Now, notice he's putting that on the exact same level. He's saying our disposition to think something like that is on the exact same level as my disposition to believe I'm seeing a light when I look at the light bulb. Right? Like right, he's not saying, well, we have this like vague notion that maybe there could be such a thing. He says, no, it's almost like you're perceiving it. Calvin recognizes, at least implicitly, that other sorts of conditions may trigger this disposition. Upon reading the Bible, one may be impressed with a deep sense that God is speaking to him. Upon having done what I know is cheap or wrong or wicked, I may feel guilty in God's sight and form the belief God disapproves of what I have done. Upon confession and repentance, I may feel forgiven, forming the belief that God forgives me for what I have done. A person in grave danger may turn to God, asking for his protection and help. And of course, he or she then has the belief that God is indeed able to hear and help if he sees fit. Notice this language is all about orientation. It reminds me of a debate I had with another philosopher about whether or not animals have thoughts or beliefs, rather. Let's stick with beliefs. And he said, well, you can't have beliefs if you don't have a language. You need a language for proposition. And I said, look, I get it. I understand. But when the chimpanzee jumps out of the tree, or when the monkey jumps out of the tree, reaching for a branch of another tree, he believes he can make it. I don't think he has the proposition, the parabolic path I'm making, my legs are strong. I'm like, forget what proposition is in his head. Let's assume no proposition. But his behavior, his orientation, the actions he's taking, the behavior of the animal, the embodied principle is, I believe I can make it, even if it doesn't translate exactly into those words. And likewise, he's saying you are oriented towards God to say, I did this thing. I think he disapproves. Let me seek out God's forgiveness. Like that orientation and inclination that you have to think in that way is how he built you. And that shows a kind of belief that might be, he hasn't argued yet, might be properly basic. Go ahead.
So here's actually something I want to jump in on, see what you think. I'm actually at my parents' cottage right now, and my daughter is having a little all the other kids are around her are jumping off our boathouse, and it's about 4 meters off and then into the lake, right off the ground. And my daughter's reluctant to jump off the boathouse.
Uh-huh.
And I was telling her that the we're talking about the leap of faith, right? Because she knows that she wants to do it, and I'm saying that your higher self wants to get this done, wants to jump off the boathouse, but you have fears that are getting in the way of that. And I told her that the faith is expressed in execution, right? And Peterson goes with this idea too, that your beliefs are what you do, right? So it has that connection to that sort of being the ultimate test of what you actually believe. It's not what you say you believe or what you're hesitant to do, but it's the fact that we know that the monkey has faith, he can make the jump, is that he attempts to make the jump.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
Right.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's embodied belief.
It's embodied belief, but that is embodied belief is faith, right?
Yeah.
And faith requires sacrifice. So, but just I wanted to
orientation, sure,
I wanted
and often
to say,
sacrifice. Yeah.
Well, it's because your embodiment requires sacrifice.
In the realm of philosophy, which is a more narrow realm and encompassed like an enclosed space where this mythopoetic language that speaks to us of characters and speaks to us as if we are characters, within that, belief means something like, I say out loud yes to the truth of that proposition. Like, okay. Well, many will come to me in that day and say all sorts of things they believe, and even the demons believe in that way, right? Even the demons believe in God and tremble at his name. Like they will say, yes, I believe God exists. Like that is not.
So think of it this way:
something anyone cares about
is is that you have this cross between faith and reason. Like you have the relationship between heaven and earth is faith, and that's like and then you have the relationship of reason, which is the left and right, and at the center of the cross you have truth, right? That's you can think it's Christ, or that's the snitch that we're trying to stay calibrated to, right? But
where he will be found,
he will be found. So that up and down, the vertical there between heaven and earth, that's the find out dimension, right? That's Abraham climbing up the mountain with his son, and prepared to execute his son, or sacrifice his son, right, on the word of the Lord. That's the find out, the execution, versus the other dimension, right? The left and right there. That's reason. That's the figure out dimension, right? That's where we're in the realm of ideas, and we're playing with these ideas, and philosophers like to hang out in that figure out dimension.
Sure. Well, Roger and I are smiling because we didn't think you'd use that terminology for the horizontal.
Are you keeping this appropriate for all ages? Thank you.
Yeah, all ages. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, just wanted to
you could do it the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
love it. I love it. I think that's fantastic.
Have been accused of doing the other thing as opposed.
Well, this what did you call it? Fool around? No, you called it something else.
Finding the figuring out.
Figuring out. Okay.
Figuring out versus finding out, right?
Figuring out versus finding out.
But you could very well call it the
fine.
The other one.
Okay, all right. This is almost like the responding to the call of God to leave the land of your home and the home of your fathers and everything. Like this is the part of Abraham that goes out and then has to struggle and figure things out. And maybe I should pimp out my wife to the head of Egypt because he'll kill us all. Like all sorts of horrible wrestling with tyranny and deception and all sorts of things. It's like, okay, but when you're doing the Jacob thing of wrestling with God, when you're doing the, okay, I'm going up the mountain and like, this is like that. Okay, well, either way, you're still, I guess, if you're responding to the call, then you're also sort of doing this part of it. But okay, yeah, I follow. I think that's really fantastic. There's the figuring out and the find out. Okay.
There's another thing.
Wait, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Awesome. So there's another aspect related to this that when Sander was talking, I popped up in my mind, which is people who are founders of new systems, be it organizations, companies, entrepreneurs, etc. They literally have to sacrifice something and do a leap of faith, because the thing that they are starting, it could pretty well fail, and maybe
Yeah.
the risk of failing is pretty high. And still, these people do it, even though
Yeah.
the risk of failure is quite high.
That's
Maybe there's
actually right.
something special
Yeah,
with these people versus people who never found nothing.
exactly. That's it. Being an entrepreneur is an act of faith, and the key thing of that is the sacrifice. Like, even if God rejects your sacrifice, if you receive that in humility, that teaches you something about the world. It teaches you more about the world than you can ever than you could propose with from this the figure out dimension. And that actually, and I think like a good example of that, like building out what Roger just said, um, is is Elon Musk and SpaceX, right? Is one of the reasons that SpaceX has been more successful than NASA is that um, Elon invests more in faith and execution. So he has this whole iteration thing where he's not afraid. If the engineers can't figure it out, then he's like, fine, we'll send a rocket up and we'll see what happens. Right. So he'll actually like go, he intentionally pushes all his tests
To
to
collect data, he'll throw away. Okay.
multiple, like, to failure. So he makes the right, like in the Cain and Abel sense, he makes the right offerings to God. And when God rejects his sacrifice, he pays attention to why, and he learns from that, right? And then he takes that information back to his figuring out, right, back to the drawing board. Okay, what did we learn? What did
Sure.
God accept? What did God reject? What did we learn? And let's figure it out again. Let's fire the next rocket. And because of that, they've made much more much more rapid progress. SpaceX made rapid progress compared to NASA, who would just stay in the drawing room, right? Like Abraham staying in his tent for the first half of his life. Right?
We don't have enough data yet to know if this will work. The one way you could do it is say, let's go get more data. Let's blow it up and we'll have the data that we need.
Yeah. But yeah, you're not just blowing up things for the sake of it. You're actually, okay, what's our best guess?
Yeah.
Let's offer to God our best guess of the truth, right? And see how he responds. And we learn from that, and then that we bring that back, incorporate that back into our reasoning, and that's sort of the connection of how we go from going back from the finding out to the figuring out dimension. We get closer and closer to the truth, and that's the relationship between them.
So hold on, I'm not so knowledgeable about the biography of Abraham. So you're saying that he was extra super careful, cautious, and super protected in the first
Well,
half of his life?
he was like 80 before he left his parents' house to follow God's calling to go out into a new land. Mm-hmm. When God spoke to him to go out.
So he lived his earlier life like as if in a protective bubble, risking literally nothing.
Yeah.
His life wasn't on the line. Yeah, he was. Yeah.
So
and this goes back to
very, very similar to the beginning, the earlier part of the life of the Buddha as well.
Yeah, it is.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same story in that regard.
There's almost
an parallel there.
There's almost an inescapable element of sacrifice in orientation. Just you're not going to get away from it. You can stay in the bubble, as you called it, and then you're not oriented towards anything. But if you're going to move in any direction, you're not moving in all those other directions.
Yeah.
So the only way to move anywhere is sacrifice. The same with your attention, what you're focusing on.
And then what you're saying though is sort of the way of looking at this is the matter has that potentiality, but through the choice of that form, like you're engaging with the spirit, right? And you're creating an actuality, and and that faith is testing a spirit, right, to see if it's actually the true spirit of God, if it's actually taking you towards being or taking you towards unbeing in some sort of sense, right?
Yeah,
In
it's
some many
or if
many
you're
ways
slightly
they go wrong.
missing it and maybe you
Exactly.
have to keep readjusting the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not maybe if that's the whole relationship, just
That's
like
the
your
only way to
relationship
do
with
it.
life is you're constantly readjusting. So you're constantly testing your faith and figuring out and keeping the whole system calibrated.
I can't tell you how happy I'm that you're here this time. This is fantastic.
Also, literally any decision that we make, any yes that we say, is the same as saying no to all the other endless things,
Mhm.
endless paths.
It's
So
unavoidable.
yeah, it's crazy if we think about it. Then
Yeah.
when we choose one path, millions or endless other paths are just rejected.
And what Xander's saying is that also when you shoot and you don't quite hit the mark, the spirit of Cain is one of the responses you can have to that,
Yes.
right? If you don't have a humble and a grateful attitude that says, okay, well, what do I need to learn here and how do I make use of the knowledge I've now gained from the failure of this attempt? And instead you go, well, it's just not fair. I'm trying my hardest. It's not working. Throw to hell with all of it. It's like,
Yeah.
you'll get to hell with all of it. You will
Yeah.
get to hell with all of it if that's your attitude. You can smash to pieces the thing you were hoping to become, and then where are you? You're nowhere.
But
I mean, we
or,
talk
or
about this
you're
the other day.
stuck. You're condemning yourself to an unreality, right? You're saying
Yeah.
that God's trying to tell you, that give you His judgment, and if you reject His judgment, then you're going to remain trapped in your own the hell of your own creation, right?
If you all knew what was happening in my life the last 3 weeks and how much you're punching me in the face with a lot of preaching in this, I'm loving it. I'm loving every second of it, and it's awesome. But it's our lives. This is how we always live and burn up and rise again. Let's just do a paragraph here. I'm so desperate not to have 8 lectures. Sorry, really quickly. There are therefore many conditions and circumstances. All right, there are therefore many conditions and circumstances that call forth belief in God. Your attitudes, these are attitudes he's listing here: guilt, gratitude, danger, a sense of God's presence, a sense that he speaks, perception of various parts of the universe. All of these are either perceptual or quasi-perceptual or seemingly perceptual inclinations, or they're ingrained dispositions that he's saying you have. You're born in such a way that the tree experience is what you're going to have when you open your eyes and look in that direction. Likewise, you're the sort of creature inclined to think, I'm not sure God approves of what I just did. Is there forgiveness for me or whatever? Like, that's just sort of in you from the start. You're not arguing to it to build it up. A complete job would explore the phenomenology of all these conditions and of more besides. This is why we study him in year 3 in the Children of Nietzsche section, this Plantinga guy. This is a large and important topic, but here I can only point to the existence of these conditions. So all he's saying is that it's true that people are inclined to think in these ways. Of course, none of the beliefs I mentioned a moment ago is the simple belief that God exists. What we have instead are such beliefs as God is speaking to me, God has created all this, God disapproves of what I've done, God forgives me, and God is to be thanked and praised. These propositions are properly basic in the right circumstances, but it is quite consistent with this to suppose that the proposition, there is such a person as God, is neither properly basic nor taken as basic by those who believe in God. Perhaps what they take as basic are such propositions as 8 through 12, the ones we just read. Believing in the existence of God on the basis of propositions such as those. So the properly basic are those ingrained dispositions. And then implied in that is that, well, God must exist. Maybe, he's saying. He's not really telling us his thought. He's taking us on a journey here, like he's been doing. And one of the things that makes his essays so much fun to read, and I'll just say it one more time, is that he has 8 voices in his head arguing back and forth 12 different times. And then he just sort of like leads us on a journey through the essay where he says one thing, he goes, wow, but that's not quite right. Oh, but what about this objection? And then he ends up bringing us to his conclusion. All right. It is not the relatively high level and general proposition God exists that is properly basic, but instead propositions detailing some of his attributes or actions. I'm going to pause. Anybody have something to say? I'm sure you got a lot to say, but one more paragraph. Suppose we return to the analogy between belief in God and belief in the existence of perceptual objects, other persons, or the past. Here too, it is relatively, and the past. Here too, it is relatively specific and concrete propositions rather than their more general and abstract colleagues that are properly basic. Perhaps such items as there are trees, there are other persons, and the world has existed for more than 5 minutes are not, in fact, properly basic, but instead such propositions as I see a tree, that person is pleased, and I had breakfast more than an hour ago. Those might be properly basic. They deserve that accolade, perhaps. Of course, propositions of the latter sort immediately and self-evidently entail propositions of the former sort, and perhaps there is thus no harm in speaking of the former as properly basic, even though, so to speak, is to speak a bit loosely. The same must be said about belief in God. We may say, speaking loosely, that belief in God is properly basic, strictly speaking. However, it is probably not that proposition, but such propositions as 8 through 12. God is pleased, God forgives me, God is to be thanked and praised, God disapproves of what I've done, God created all of this, God is speaking to me. But the main point here is this: belief in God, or those propositions, are properly basic. To say so, however, is not to deny that there are justifying conditions for these beliefs, or conditions that confer justification on one who accepts them as basic. They are therefore not groundless or gratuitous. Let's pause. That's the end of section B. So now I think he's going to talk about the grounding of these things. And it seems like, from what he said before, there's a hint that the grounding might have something to do with inescapability, ingrained inclination to think in a certain way, whether or not you're in the proper conditions so that your thinking can be relied upon, right? I can say, I think I'm seeing a tree. And if you say, well, you've got VR goggles on, so how do you know what you're looking at? You say, oh, I'm not in a good condition to report what I'm seeing, right? So it's not true that the statements sort of as themselves in an analytic sense are necessarily properly basic, but that a person could be a person with inclinations and attitudes and orientations like, I think God's mad at me, or God is to be thanked, and things like that, that person could be in a position where they are grounded in saying, I'm going to say justified, grounded in holding properly basic beliefs of that sort, which would entail the more abstract propositions, God exists. How's that for reading what he's saying? I'm just trying to understand him. All right, I'm going to let y'all interrupt when you want. We've got section C here and then section D on fideism. So section C, is argument relevant to basic belief in God? Suppose someone accepts belief in God as basic. Does it not follow that he will hold this belief in such a way that no argument could move him or cause him to give it up? Will he not hold it, come what may, in the teeth of any evidence or argument with which he could be presented? Does he not thereby adopt a posture in which argument and other rational methods of settling disagreement are implicitly declared irrelevant? Surely not. Suppose someone accepts there is such a person as God as basic. It does not for a moment follow that he will regard argument irrelevant to this belief of his, nor is he committed in advance to rejecting every argument against it. It could be, for example, that he accepts statement 19 as basic, which is there is such a person as God, but also accepts as basic some propositions from which, by arguments whose corresponding conditions he accepts as basics, it follows that number 19 is false, right? So he could believe, I take as basic, from my perspective, the way it looks to me, it's just, I don't need to argue to it, there is such a person as God. What else do you believe? I believe I'm a flawed individual who's liable to make mistakes and might be broken or constructed poorly. All right, well, if you can prove that, then perhaps you could lead me to a place where I say, oh, I was wrong in being inclined to believe that that thing was true without needing justification. What happens if I'm just making up an example that would match what he says here, that he could also accept some other basic propositions which would lead him to think that's not true. What happens if he is appraised of this fact, perhaps by being presented with an argument from those propositions to the denial of 19? Presumably, some change is called for. If he accepts these propositions more strongly than 19, presumably he will give the latter up. So I wonder if he's saying something like, I discover when I look in myself that I believe, basically, without any argument to it, that evil exists, that evil is to be avoided, and therefore that evil exists. And then maybe a philosopher could come along and say, aha, you are oriented in such a way that you believe there's such a person as God, and you believe that evil exists, but I can show you how those two are incompatible. Therefore, you're going to have to give up one of them. And maybe he's saying this person could be using reason and argument. He might give up the first proposition, but he might give up the second, or he might find a way to show that they're not incompatible. So he's still, Plantinga's point seems to be, just because you regard certain ideas as properly basic doesn't mean that you've given up on the rules of right thinking and that you're unmoored from any sort of logical, reasonable argument. Like you're just an unthinking person who just believes things. All right. Similarly, suppose someone believes there is no God, but also believes some proposition from which belief in God follows by argument forms he accepts. Presented with an argument from these propositions to the proposition that God exists, such a person may give up his atheism and accept belief in God. On the other hand, his atheistic belief may be stronger than his belief in some of the propositions in question, or his belief in their conjunction. It is possible, indeed, that he knows these propositions, but believes some of them less firmly than he believes that there is no God. In that case, if you present him with a valid argument from these propositions to the proposition that God exists, you may cause him to give up a proposition he knows to be true. It is thus possible to reduce the extent of someone's knowledge by giving him a sound argument from premises he knows to be true. Okay, I'm not sure I'm following, but it seems like what he's saying is, in the realm of things we argue to, everybody knows we've got the rules of right reason and logic, and we can make arguments. But what about these properly basic things? These are like cornerstones. They're still building blocks. They're still propositional statements, but they're grounded on something other than other propositional statements. They're just on the ground. And the rest of them are built off of those. He's saying, well, where's the room for reason and those sorts of rules here? He's saying, well, suppose you have an atheist who says, I think the proposition God exists is wrong. But then you also ask him what else he believes. He says, well, I believe it's always wrong to torture little babies for fun, that there are moral absolutes that you can't get around for any reason. And maybe you argue with him to the point where he starts to think that that implies that God must exist. He still can use reason to argue for and against. Both parties can argue for and against all these things, and they can weigh their originally accepted properly basic beliefs and say, oh, I was wrong about that one. So they're not unmoored from reason and logic at this point just because they accept certain things as properly basic. So a person, go ahead.
How about this? I'm not sure in absolute terms that God exists, and probably I will never be. But I ask you this: if you literally have no conception of an ideal or what excellence means, or you have no way to exchange some ideas regarding what is the best conduct, what is the best ethics for your life, you will probably be in a worse situation in terms of quality of life, self-development, virtue ethics in general, compared to a person who has a very well thought ideal of God in their mind, toward which they are aligned, and if they reverently hold this ideal, probably they will get better as human beings as time progresses, compared to the so-called quote-unquote godless person.
Interesting. There's two kinds of pragmatism going on here. One in Plantinga, and I think one in what you're saying. So what you're saying is, I think, and so I'm just going to say this and you tell me if I'm wrong, is something like, maybe I can't argue and prove it and wrap my head around it. Maybe it's too beyond me, or it's just the sort of thing that I'm not able to get to, the knowledge of the absolute or the infinite or the existence of the divine even. But if I live in the world in a way where I'm oriented towards something like that, which I think I know sort of where it is, I'm going to keep wrestling and move towards it, my life works out better. There's a pragmatism there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, my life works out better, and probably I will get along better with other people as well, with the society.
Certainly, I don't mean my life works out better in a present moment hedonism kind of way, but life is going better. Life is thriving and flourishing. Other people are doing better. Like, things are just generally, I think there's a good, like Socrates, the arche, the source of all good qua good. I think there's a good, and I'm going to be aimed towards it in my flawed sort of way. And as a result, instead of just sitting here saying, well, what does it all matter? It's all absurd. I can do whatever I want and blah, blah, blah. If I'm living that way, it turns out that in reality, there's more good in the world, that there is progress that can be made on the dimension of goodness or kingdom building or whatever terminology people want to use in different mythopoetic frameworks. But that's the kind of thing you're talking about, yes?
Yeah, and also to give you an additional example, look at the diametrical opposites. People who literally have no ideals such as this, neither a role model or the conception of an absolute good, and they live oriented toward what feels right, otherwise unenlightened hedonism. Imagine an entire society going that way, how
Sure.
things will go. We saw that literally with the fall of Rome. Most people were in the games at any time of the day. In
It's
the
scary
city of
because
Rome.
if you talk to somebody who is thinking that way, they will say, "Yeah, who cares? It's all baloney. I don't care if it all gets destroyed." Yeah, they can be consistent. All right, go ahead.
I just want to actually sort of say is well, I have a couple couple of
Yeah.
things to say on this, but
Good comment.
I was trying to look for the essay. Is the when was it written? It was I
The essay we're reading today?
like ballpark. It doesn't have to give me a specific date, like 2000s,
Good
or was
question.
it like a 1900s, or when was it?
Oh, no. He's I think he's still alive today.
Okay, yeah. So I thought I saw like
this seems
2011, but I might be. I think when I
yeah.
was searching, but I could be wrong.
Let me find out. That's a good question. It's
Well, anyways, he's a contemporary or modern writer is the key thing. So I haven't heard like you said like you're like in the third chapter or something like that. You've gone through several different things. So maybe he's built this up. But I'm trying to
2000. It looks like maybe
2000. Okay.
Maybe
it seems very strange to me, and maybe it's
1983.
Okay, that this idea that well, that propositions are the foundation, right? Of
well, he's saying
knowledge. So like
there's a grounding beneath. There's a grounding beneath. So he has three tiers. So grounding, properly basic propositions, and then things you argue to.
Yeah. Okay. And the grounding.
The grounding doesn't seem to be propositional.
Okay. Yeah. So which makes sense to me. I mean, I guess. Yeah, so you have grounding. So in the grounding of these propositions come from something, from some experiences, and he had like the different categories. I'm having trouble. My issue is sort of seeing the counter argument, or like why is it just seems so fundamental that like just saying that you believe in God is not a sign of insanity or unreason. Like even my most extreme
but saying you believe in God is not crazy. But if I were to say to you, I believe in the teapot around Mars, and you say why, and then I say to you, and this is the part that's unreasonable, then I say I don't need a why. I'm inclined in my composition to be disposed to believe in the teapot that's floating around Mars. Mm-hmm. Now there's a question if you're talking to a crazy person, and if any reason you could give me would even register with me, right? So obviously I could be like Thomas Aquinas and I could say, I believe in God. Why? Well, because look, this moved, right? Yeah. I mean, you can't have movement unless you've got a prime mover. And look, I'll take you through all the arguments and here's how it works. There must have been a prime mover. I've got reason. So Aquinas is saying, here's my reason for believing in God.
Yeah.
If it's properly basic, the person who believes in God in a properly as properly basic would be saying, don't ask me for a reason. I can't not believe it. And then he's saying it's on the same level of the same kind of grounding as disposition and perception and the inclination I have to believe in my memory when I don't have a reason to think I've been fooled by my memory. So I believe in God like I see the sun. There it is. Or I believe in God like I believe that you're in pain when you're wincing and you're holding your toe and jumping up and down and going, ow, 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 ow. Like I believe you're not a robot that knows how to be programmed to act as though you would act when I know I'm in pain. Mm-hmm. Because that's how, like, I don't need to argue to that. He's saying, yes. Possibly.
But even, okay. And again, it's sort of like, I believe you, like, you know, I believe I see this person doing that. So to say, and like I've never seen Mars, but I believe in Mars. Like you're talking about the teapot, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't trace back to the specific reasons why I believe in Mars. Like as people, like there's multiple, like there's not one single cause of like why I believe in Mars. There's like I've developed a worldview from my experience with people and so forth, and I have like different like sources of evidence, like I've seen in the sky, and that it would be a very it would be a shocking thing to me based on my experience at this point to discover that Mars didn't exist.
Yes.
So similarly, I
But
think
if you believe in Mars because you're looking at it, you've been studying it through a telescope, you've mapped out the ellipse formula that shows you where to point your telescope in 3 weeks so that you'll be seeing Mars because you know where it's going to be and all of that stuff. The act of perceiving Mars doesn't need to be argued to. Maybe I'd have to argue why I believe my society isn't lying to me and that space is fake and that NASA made up that the Earth is round and all that stuff.
But as how much are you hanging on that what that Mars is? And I think that's sort of, and then maybe he explores that others
Sure.
is like this conception. What conception of God,
right?
Is he improving or disimproving? Right.
Good point.
If I just sort of say that like Mars is the light in the sky that I see and I trace with my telescope and I limit and I'm parsimonious about my statements about.
Do you believe that Mars has a core? Do you believe in Mars quakes?
Yeah.
Do you believe that there's a fifth smallest rock at the foot of a certain mountain near a crater on this part of Mars? Like there's all sorts of things you can know about. Likewise, you can still argue about how should I understand God's eternality or his all-powerfulness or his all-knowingness. Like there's plenty to still figure out.
I think it's still sane to like it's still proposition, like there's nothing irrational about saying I believe in Mars or I believe in God, because then you have to drill down to what do you mean when I say I believe in God. I think, and this is, I mean, I'll criticize it, but I think this is I noticed it was Calvinist, and I think that part of this is I think sola fide, getting them into tying them into knots, right? So then because that's sort of a statement of, well, I don't, it's faith alone, right? So you have to have this propositional faith in God. And then, so now we have to build up this whole elaborate propositional construct to justify, well, what is propositional faith, and what does propositional faith mean, and how is propositional faith like a rational concept, because it becomes very important for the Protestant, because that's the salvation of God. It's sort of like I believe my faith must be propositional. Like I mean, and some denominations of Protestantism make it very explicit that, like, when you make this sort of statement of faith, is like I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Then, well, that's it. Then you're saved. You just done it, right? Like it's and so that puts a lot of magic into. Well, I'm not saying I'm sort of trying to I don't want to criticize it, but I'm trying to sort of say, like,
we can criticize it. I just don't want to be unfair to our Protestant brothers and sisters. Because no, go ahead.
But what and I don't and it's certainly not abroad. But I think that it's sort of what I'm trying to get to it as the underlying idea that okay, that makes it a very powerful statement, or a very, like, that belief, that propositional, it gives propositional belief like this amazing weight, divine weight. So then you have to get into the debate. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm way off base,
so
but I'm just like,
let me bounce it back to you, and then you tennis racket it back to me, because I think I would slightly word what you're saying slightly differently and say, in the breast of every monotheist, there's a civil war going on here because I hear the Protestants do exactly the mistake that you're talking about, where it's like okay, congratulations, I got you to say out loud God is real and God exists. It's like, well, Jesus said the demons say that, and it doesn't mean anything. And many will even say, Lord, Lord, and right. Okay. But I also see them treating the statement. What was the altar call response that you gave? What was that statement? It was really good.
I,
I believe in Jesus Christ as my
this is
Lord and
the
Savior.
Savior. I believe in Jesus
Right.
Christ, as my Lord
Okay.
and Savior.
So it's like some of them I see them treating that statement like saying I do at the altar.
Yeah.
It's not really propositional. It's more like an action,
Yeah. It
which would
becomes a
put it
speech
in this
action.
other. It would put it in
Yeah.
this other category of saying I'm announcing my orientation and thereby making my orientation
Yeah.
be like this or
I'm
something.
like it's a covenant at that point, and I'm accepting a
Yeah.
covenant with God. Right.
Yeah, so that would be qualitatively the exact important distinction you're making, but on the other side of it. And they also talk all the time about it's not about uh like ceremonies and things to believe and arguments. It's about a relationship. It's like, well, okay, I love hearing them say that because they don't know that everybody says that. I've literally I've met Native Americans and like all sorts
Yeah.
of people with different religious faiths. Like everybody says that. It's probably true if they actually embrace it and wrestle with it and everything. But okay, so
So
let's
what?
say an individual Protestant might be on either side of that divide.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like it's certainly, and it's not there's very sophisticated theology in the Protestant, and this is an exercise in it. But I'm just sort of trying to again, and then I'm just trying to get out under the part of this that seems self-evident to me is, of course, someone can believe in God and it's rational.
Right.
Like a
So I want
proposition.
to
It looks like a
clarify that
proposition.
again. That was the other thing I should have said. Is that again? It's not believing in God is on its face rational or irrational. It's believing in God as properly basic that could be an unmooring from rationality. According to, and I think he's right to try to answer that objection here, because to a lot of people, okay, this it's funny, but I actually think the argument for God's existence, which we will look at in Anselm, is way more powerful than people think it is. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm just saying way more powerful. But the idea, at least way more powerful. But the idea is that, like, okay,
Do we have another?
where was I going with that? Because I don't want to go into. All
Really,
right,
it's
so
really powerful. You're saying
it's really powerful. But the idea is,
basic proposition.
It is an argument for God's existence, which would put it outside the realm of agreement with Plantinga. And I'm getting so hung up on that in my brain that I'm forgetting the other point I was trying to make.
So what I was trying to figure out what is Plantinga arguing out? Why is he trying to make this argument?
Right. It's whether or not it's properly basic. That maybe cuts it away from rationality. Right. So Plantinga's not trying to argue, here's my argument that God exists. He's trying to argue if a person says they believe in God exists, asking them for a reason is stupid. They don't need one. They don't need a reason. And when you say I don't need a reason, it seems like you're cutting me off from rationality. He says, no, that's not true. You can use rational arguments and a person can still be reasonable and even question their properly basic beliefs and then say, oh, I was wrong about this one. I was oriented the wrong way. I didn't understand. And they can come to believe in God or lose faith in God based on all of that.
I guess what I'm saying is what would the argument be that it wouldn't be properly basic, because, and that's why I sort of going to like the knowledge required for Mars, because it in
the knowledge required for directly.
I could have a very simplistic idea of God, like a very low resolution version, like idea of God, so that I don't see how that could be assailable as a basic belief.
I understand the question now.
Which sort of goes to what Roger was saying, like, oh, my life goes generally better when I act as if God exists. So I believe that there's God. I see that as evidence of his God. That's just one way that basic belief could be justified, if it even needs justification. But
you're saying, well, what's the argument against it?
Like, because I could like the Mars thing. I could know Mars.
Right.
I could know because I've seen it in a telescope and I figured that, or it's just I've seen it on TV. I've talked to people. I know Mars from
that's the difference.
from mythology.
Okay,
It's
wait, that's the
part of my
difference.
yeah.
If you tell me, if I say, why do you believe in Mars, the existence of Mars, and you tell me, because I don't think that there's a reason for a grand civilization-wide conspiracy to lie to me about the number of bodies that orbit the sun, because it's not the sort of thing anybody would have an interest in doing that. If you say, I read about it in a textbook, if you say, you know, if there was some reason to notice that it didn't really exist, somebody had plenty of incentive to point that out by now, and there'd be no reason for people to agree to it, to keep the lie going. If you said that, you're giving me reasons. You're not believing in Mars because it's properly basic to believe in Mars. You're giving me reasons, and that's fine. You should, because I don't know if it.
In that case, I'm giving you reasons why for the counterfactual, right? Like because I'm trying to posit, okay, there's a conspiracy. The reason that I would have for giving Mars is because I've had conversations with people, and Mars has come up, and I have no reason to disbelieve
Generally
them.
trust them. Yeah,
I
those are
see
all
them as,
reasons. That's not
but
you believing in Mars because it's properly basic to believe in Mars. That's really good reasons for believing in Mars. The difference is if you look through a telescope and you're the first person to discover Mars,
okay.
and you see it and you write down where it is, the act of the fact that you say, I'm seeing Mars right now, I believe I'm looking at Mars, that might be properly basic.
Okay, so it has to be like essentially like solipsistically obtained, and I'm just using solipsism as sort of like a basic as sort of a way to explain this idea of like it can't be from an intermediary source. It has to be from my own synthesis as an individual.
There is something personal about it. I'm not sure. Okay, yes, sort of yes. The properly basic ideas are a very weird category of ideas, because let's forget Mars. I'm telling you, I'm holding a soda can, an empty soda can in my hand. If you ask me, why do I believe I'm holding an empty soda can? I can say, well, here's the reasons I don't think I'm asleep and dreaming. Here's the reasons why I don't think I'm in a matrix or fooled by an all-powerful Cartesian demon. Like, I could give you reasons, and maybe they'd be good.
The fundamental reason is that you have an immediate sensory experience. You're describing something that you yourself has experienced.
So I could give reasons, and we could have arguments, or I could just say, why are you asking me that question? I'm telling you, I'm holding a can. I just believe it as if it's properly basic. I don't need to make arguments to it. The grounding is in the fact that I feel it and I see it.
Yeah.
And then now here's the problem. Lots of philosophers say, you want that to be the end of the argument? There's no, I'm going to ask you questions. How do you know you're not dreaming? How do you know whatever? How do you know it's a soda can? Like whatever. So some people want to say there's no such thing as a properly basic belief, but some people want to say, no, it's proper for me to say, I have no reason to believe that my cognitive abilities are not working right now. Nobody's saying, boy, you sound crazy and not like yourself. I don't think I'm dreaming, blah, blah, blah. I'm in the sort of condition where it's okay for me to say, I just take it as true because I can't not feel it when I'm holding it, and I can't not see it when I'm looking at it. And so I don't need to argue beneath that.
So
likewise, if I'm the sort of person with a disposition to say, I feel guilty about what I did yesterday, I think God's not happy with me, it's like feeling a soda can. I can't not feel that.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
that's
the category.
Conceptually
grounded as opposed to
it's dispositional.
Grounded.
Yeah, I'm inclined. I could lie to you and say I don't believe in God, but the truth is I feel guilty. Why? Because he was watching. What do you mean he? I can't not think it. I'm disposed to think in that way because that's God's fingerprint is on me. I was made in such a way. And if I'm not a perverted, broken, crazy creature, that it's possible to be in a condition where it is appropriate to call something basic like that. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of pieces to that, but I think that's the question at play here, and I think that's the answer from Plantinga's perspective.
But also, isn't the person who is relating to the can or to God because of their much closer relationship in terms of epistemology, aren't their stakes way higher in regard to believing this or that about the can or about God than the other person who is talking to them far away through a video call and has no, has no
Yes, it is
corroborating,
personal.
it's
Mhm.
personal.
It might be right and properly basic for you to say Zara is a person who believes he's holding a soda can, right? That's fine. But I'm the one with the personal grounding of the experience of holding the soda can, right? So you can make a properly basic belief about other persons. Like it would be, according
Or
to Plantic, a properly basic for me to say you are in pain right now because you're screaming and crying.
here's maybe another way of understanding it, like where if I'm following, if Roger had no personal experiences with soda cans before, if he'd never experienced a soda can, so this is the first time he'd ever seen a soda can, and it was um uh like it was Zara picking it up and putting it and showing it on the screen, then Roger could have the belief or tell the piece like there's these things called, so like he could maybe be astounded by this. He's going to get off this call, go tell his his friends and family there's these things called soda cans. Have you heard of these before? That you can pick them up and show them on screens, right?
The
Like
gods must be crazy.
gods must be crazy. Yeah. If that in that regard, he wouldn't it wouldn't be a the basic belief in soda there's soda cans would be attainable to him, but he wouldn't have it. He wouldn't have basic beliefs because he would only have he'd only
Yes,
have the indirect
absolutely.
belief
If you
of
ask
saying,
Roger, perfect. That point that helps explain it so much better. If that experience all happened, and you ask Roger, why do you believe in soda cans? He would say, a person who I find to not be deceptive in any in most ways, and who didn't seem to have any reason to lie, showed me this thing that I'd never seen before. I don't know how heavy it is. I don't know what it feels like to hold it or anything. But there's an object about this big, kind of like fits in a hand, and people call it a soda can, and I believe that exists. I've been shown evidence of it. He's giving reasons. He's not believing in it properly basic. But I believe this can exists in my hand with a properly basic grounding, according to
yes, because
Plantinga.
it's
I don't need to give you a reason.
because it's
The
perceptual and
revelation of the soda can.
perceptually and conceptually grounded. If I was
Yeah,
more
well,
cognitive sciencey
and it has something to do with the
psychology brain.
inescapability. It has something to do with the fact that I'm built in such a way that I can't not feel that I'm holding it.
Yeah.
It's kind of inescapable. And likewise, somebody might say, I feel as though, and we can even add some pragmatism from Roger here, I feel as though the best way to live life is with gratitude. Gratitude to who? The one who made it all. What are you talking about? That's how I feel. I'm living it all the time, and I can't not feel like I fail when I fail to do that. And I can't not feel like that's not the best way to live. It's like, okay,
so
well,
it's
then
again perceptually and conceptually grounded, right? I have this
it is
experience of that.
dispositionally grounded.
What do you mean dispositionally
Well,
grounded? 'Cause you use
it's
that twice.
also so because
I have a disposition.
Roger perceives the soda can that I'm holding up, and so maybe he could say I have a properly basic belief in things that I can see through screens and stuff too, but how do I put this? I wasn't saying it's not perceptive. He's saying perceptions are properly basic, but the quality that makes them properly basic that they have in common with the belief in God is the idea that as I'm holding it, I can't not believe in it because I'm the sort of thing that feels it. I'm built in such a way that seeing the thing is inescapable to me when I'm looking at it. Something like that.
Yeah, I would say, I would add to that and say that mystical experiences of what we might be so overwhelmed with that we definitely no longer are atheistic and maybe even shaky as agnostics, already more tending to there being something awesome underlying the universe. Maybe that's way more powerful than trying to sift our way through logic and propositions.
Okay, so maybe another way to come at it too might be is that is like a I remember my faith is find out, and the the figure out is the reason is the figure out that basic the basic propositional beliefs are find out derived, right? In the sense of I've tested the world, right? I have this thing called the soda can in my hand. Well, I have the Corona. I do one, but I have like the non-alcoholic Corona bottles here, right? So the non-alcoholic Corona bottle is a thing I have a personal experience with, and I can testify that the existence of non-alcoholic Corona bottles. And that's I did. This is not derived from reason. This is not something I've figured out, right? This is something I've experienced.
Yes.
This is something I've found out. I found out that there's Corona bottles.
That it would be in the found out category. Yeah.
Yes. And that's make it. So basically, and maybe that's what he's trying to argue is that how and maybe what's with what the to try and understand what he's getting around here is that he's trying to instead of the figure out, we'll use the F around. So it's the find out or the F around, and he's like,
yeah, the F around is
how do I get God? How do I get my saying I believe of God out of purely the F around category? How do I express to atheists and that
might be a waste of time, maybe.
How do I express it? Well, maybe what he's trying to argue is like, how do I express that this is from the find out category, or at least it's a proposition from the find out,
right?
Based
and
on
we can use,
category.
He says, logic and argument in that. We can say, well, what else do you believe, Mr. Atheist? Do you believe that some things are right and wrong? He goes, yes, I'm disposed to think that certain things are always wrong. Okay, that's an interesting thing. You didn't discover that in your microscope or your telescope or anything else. But you're built in such a way that you can't not think that, huh? And then you can use argument and say, well, does that mean God must exist? And likewise, the atheist can say, do you find it inescapable that some things that do exist and are real in the world are evil? And you say, yes, I just find certain things to be evil. And he says, well, then that means that your other proposition, God exists, can't be true. And you can still use argument and reason in that realm. But what you're not doing is arguing that God exists. Let's see here. When you're doing that, you're playing with the possible correlations and incompatibilities between properly basic beliefs, is how he described it. But that's not the same thing as giving a cosmological or ontological or design argument for God's existence. It's that would be using reason to get you to a point where you assent to a proposition. This other realm is saying, I can't not think this. Well, what are the implications of that? And does that fit in with the other things I can't not think? And maybe I have to give one up, and perhaps I'm wrong about it. Which seems to be logically a contradiction, by the way, because if they really are properly basic, you shouldn't be able to give up on them, I suppose. But I don't know. All right, let's finish this. So a person can accept belief in God as basic without accepting it dogmatically. That is, in such a way that he will ignore any contrary evidence or argument. And now a second question. Suppose the fact is belief in God is properly basic. Does it follow that one who accepts it dogmatically is within his epistemic rights? Does it follow that someone who is within his rights in accepting it as basic remains justified in this belief, no matter what counter-argument or counter-evidence arises? Great question. His response is, again, certainly not. Okay, so properly basic beliefs are not beyond criticism logically, according to him. The justification conferring conditions mentioned above must be seen as conferring prima facie rather than ultima facie, or all things considered justification. This justification can be overridden. My being appeared to Treely gives me that's like what we said, being appeared to Marsley, when you're actually looking at it. But of course, this right can be overridden. I might know, for example, that I suffer from the dreaded dendrological disorder, whose victims are appeared to treely only when there are no trees present. If I do know that, then I am not within my rights in taking as basic the proposition I see a tree when I am appeared to treely. The same goes for the conditions that confer justification on belief in God. Like the 14-year-old theist above, what he talked about above, perhaps I have been brought up to believe in God and am infinite, and I am initially within my rights in doing so, but conditions can arise in which perhaps I am no longer justified in this belief. Perhaps you propose to me an argument for conclusion that it is impossible that there be such a person as God. If this argument is convincing for me, if it starts from premises that seem self-evident to me and proceeds by argument forms that seem self-evidently valid, then perhaps I am no longer justified in accepting theistic belief. Following John Pollock, we may say that a condition that overrides my prima facie justification for P is defeating conditions or defeater for P for me. Defeaters, of course, are themselves prima facie defeaters, for the defeater can be defeated. Perhaps I spot a fallacy in the initially convincing argument. Perhaps I discover a convincing argument for the denial of one of its premises. Perhaps I learn on reliable authority that someone else has done one of those things. Then the defeater is defeated, and I am once again within my rights in accepting P. Of course, a similar remark must be made about defeaters. They are also subject to defeaters, and so on. Many believers in God have been brought up to believe, but then encountered potential defeaters. They have read books by skeptics, been appraised of the atheological argument from evil, heard it said that theistic belief is just a matter of wish fulfillment, or only a means whereby one socioeconomic class keeps another in bondage. These circumstances constitute potential defeaters for justification in theistic belief. If the believer is to remain justified, something further is called for, something that prima facie defeats the defeaters. Again, so in this realm of properly grounded things, you can have defeaters, but you're still not arguing to anything. It's the properly basic ideas being properly grounded, having proper correlations, or defeating each other where all of the logic and the argument resides. None of it is arguing to it from other propositions that you've accepted. It sounds like it is because he's talking about grounding, but that grounding is in something dispositionally inescapable, is what it seems like, not another proposition that I believe. Thus, the free will defense is a defeater for the atheological argument from evil, which is a potential defeater for theistic belief. Suppose I am within my epistemic rights in accepting belief in God as basic, and suppose I am presented with a plausible argument by Democritus, let us say, for the conclusion that the existence of God is logically incompatible with the existence of evil. Let us add that I am strongly convinced that there is evil. This is a potential defeater of my being rational in accepting theistic belief. What is required, if I am to continue to believe rationally, is a defeater for that defeater. Perhaps I discover a flaw in Democritus's argument, or perhaps I have it on reliable authority that Augustine, say, has discovered a flaw in the argument. Then I am once more justified in my original belief. All right, I'm not going to argue that he's right or wrong here. We're just trying to understand the framework that he's setting up. And the framework he's setting up is that there's a grounding that inescapably supports certain properly basic propositions. And then on those properly basic propositions, we argue to other propositions. Those properly basic propositions are still within the realm of logic in the sense that we can logically argue that they're not properly grounded, that they should be removed, or that they fall through the ground, or that they weren't there to begin with, or that logically they entail another thing that's properly grounded, or leading to things that we build up on top of them, or that two of them are incompatible with each other, and so one must go and the other be the defeater of it. We can still use logic in this realm, but we're not talking about ideas, propositional ideas, which we've argued to from other propositional ideas. Rather, we're talking about propositional ideas which are, for us, properly basic if we're in the sort of condition where we can regard our inescapable dispositions to be accurate or not deceived for some reason. Okay. Last section.
Isn't that a very fabulous and fancy way of saying revelation? So if this thing is considered revelation, it's basic, and let's parse our logic based on these propositions that came from the revelation part of our epistemology. And basically, he seems to be labeling or describing what could be termed revelation as these propositions in which we are inclined to believe because of our circumstances.
Good question. Let's
So
see if that holds. Let me
it
ask.
seems like a
No, all right. Let's see if that's true, if we should use the word revelation here. Do you think that a person could be justified in believing that a certain holy scripture is true? Or that they could have arguments that they found convincing to believe? I'm not saying that they're right or that you agree with them. I'm just saying a person could say this Vedic text or the scriptures, the King James Version of the Bible, I think it's basically inspired by God and it reveals truths to us. And
well,
they got there for reasons.
they will have their reasons, as we usually say.
Good. So it's not properly basic, perhaps, but they have reasons to believe that proposition, this Holy Scripture is true. And then that person could read a verse or a line in that Scripture which says something to them that they don't have any perception of or natural inclination to believe or disposition to think must be true or find inescapable. And they could say, oh, I believe that proposition. Why? Because it was revealed to me. Why? Through the text that reveals truths to me. Yes? Right. That would be revelation, but none of that is properly basic, not even to the person who's thinking it. They're giving all sorts of arguments for believing the text, and then they're believing that proposition, not because they find themselves unable not to think it, but because they read it and they just added it to the list of things that they believe because it comes from the book that's always true to them.
But I mean also not in just revelation as from scriptural revelation, which is basically revelation with several removes. Basically, it came from, say, Abraham and then many other people in between. So we have no idea
Good.
what
So there's a type of revelation that's not
Yeah.
properly basic, but you're saying, but this thing he's talking about could also be called revelation.
Yeah, like the revelation of the soda can that is communicated by the soda can prophet.
Huh.
That soda can is a thing, and it has
The
these
senses
properties.
being the prophets. That's an interesting
And
way of thinking about it.
and the other guys never seen a soda can in their lives. I thought the Gods Must Be Crazy film, as an example, is a great example. Those people, those Kalahari Bushmen, never saw a Coke bottle in their entire lives, and suddenly one fell in their midst, and they figured out what it was for. But because there was only one, it was really a pain for them because they shared literally everything. And it's a very difficult thing. Imagine if an alien craft just pops out in the atmosphere and becomes visible and available. We will have a hard time figuring out what exactly that thing is, especially if very visible, if it's not confusable with other stuff that flies in the sky and whatnot. If it's really like Independence Day, huge thing in the sky, no one can. It's like an elephant in the room. People will. The experience of that will be basic because people can, try as they might, they cannot deny that thing.
That would be basic,
Maybe that would count as basic. But imagine one of us has a mystical experience and it was really unmistakable for that person. Unfortunately, since it's a personal mystical experience, only that person sensed it. Only that person can say that it's basic because
just like
cannot.
only I can say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. So you can still use argument and logic and reason and say, oh, I ate some bad mushrooms last night. I think that's where that came from. Or you could have a defeater for that and say, well, that's a pretty specific personal fantasy to have. It still seems to be expressing something true from somewhere, even if it was induced by a mushroom, right? You can go back and forth to say whether or not you believe in your mystical experience as pointing to truths. But you're right. If you did accept it as a revelation, you would be accepting it because of the fact that you couldn't not think it, that so that is, revelation is an interesting word for it. I'm going to keep thinking about whether or not that perfectly fits over this, because clearly there are things we would call revelation that wouldn't fit like this. But it does seem correct that when you reflect at least on why it is that you're inclined to think a certain thing in a way that seems inescapable, at least that part seems like a revelation. All right. Last section. I swear we're going to make it today, my friends. This is a pretty cool essay, but Section D, fideism. I take up one final question. In Reflections on Christian Philosophy, Ralph McInerney suggests that what I have been calling Reformed epistemology is fideism. Is he right? Is the Reformed epistemologist perforce a fideist? That depends. It depends obviously enough on how we propose to use the term fideism. According to my dictionary, fideism is exclusive or basic reliance upon faith alone, as Xander was saying, right? Faith alone, accompanied by a consequent disparagement of reason and utilized especially in the pursuit of philosophical or religious truth. A fideist, therefore, urges reliance on faith rather than reason in matters philosophical and religious, and he may go on to disparage and denigrate reason. We may thus distinguish at least two grades of fideism. Moderate fideism, according to which we must rely upon faith rather than reason in religious matters, and extreme fideism, which disparages and denigrates reason. Now, let us ask first whether the Reformed epistemologist is obliged to be an extreme fideist. Of course, there is more than one way of disparaging reason. One way to do it is to claim that to take a proposition on faith is higher or better than accepting it on the basis of reason. Another way to disparage reason is to follow Kant in holding that reason left to itself inevitably falls into paradox and antimony on ultimate matters. According to Kant, pure reason offers us conclusive argument for supposing that the universe had no beginning, but also, unfortunately, conclusive arguments for the denial of that proposition. I do not think any of the alleged arguments are anywhere nearly conclusive, but if Kant were right, then presumably reason would not deserve to be paid attention to, at least on this topic. According to the most common brand of extreme fideism, however, reason and faith conflict or clash on matters of religious importance, and when they do, faith is to be preferred and reason suppressed. Thus, according to Kierkegaard, faith teaches the absurdity that the eternal is the historical. He means to say, I think, that this proposition is among the deliverances of faith, but absurd from the point of view of reason, and it should be accepted despite its absurdity. The turn of the century Russian theologian Shestov carried extreme fideism even further. He held that one can attain religious truth only by rejecting the proposition that 2 + 2 = 4 and accepting instead that 2 + 2 = 5. Now it is clear, I suppose, that the Reformed epistemologist need not be an extreme fideist. His views on the proper basicality of belief in God surely do not commit him to thinking that faith and reason conflict. So suppose we ask instead whether the Reformed epistemologist is committed to moderate fideism. And again, that depends. It depends upon how we propose to use the terms reason and faith. One possibility would be to follow Abraham Kuyper, who proposes to use these terms in such a way that one takes on faith whatever one accepts, but does not accept on the basis of argument or inference or demonstration. Quote, there is thus no objection to the use of the term faith for that function of the soul by which it attains certainty immediately or directly without the aid of discursive demonstration. This places faith over against demonstration, but not over against knowing. On this use of these terms, anything taken as basic is taken on faith. Anything believed on the basis of other beliefs is taken on reason. I take 2 and 1 to be 3 as basic. Accordingly, I take it on faith. When I am appropriately appeared to, I take as basic such propositions as I see a tree before me, or there is a house over there. On the present construal, I take these things on faith. I remember that I had lunch this noon, but do not accept this belief on the basis of other propositions. This too, then, I take on faith. On the other hand, when I take on the basis of reason, what I take on the basis of reason is what I believe on the basis of argument or inference from other propositions. Thus, I take 2 and 1 to make 3 on faith, but I take 21 times 45 is 945 by reason. For I accept the latter on the basis of calculation, which is a form of argument. Further, suppose I accept supralapsarianism or premillennialism or the doctrine of the virgin birth on the grounds that God proposes these doctrines for our belief and God proposes only truths. Then, on Kuyper's use of these terms, I accept these doctrines not by faith, but by reason, right? If I say, I believe in the virgin birth because the Bible tells me so, and also I have reasons to believe that the Bible is truly the word of God, I'm giving reasons, right? Maybe I'm wrong. We can argue about it, but I'm building things up. I'm taking these propositions to point to accepting this one. So I don't take it on faith. Indeed, if with Kierkegaard and Shestov, I hold that the eternal is the historical and that 2 and 2 make 5, because I believe God proposes these things for my belief, then on the present construal, I take them not on faith, but on the basis of reason. And here we can see, I think, that Kuyper's use of these terms is not the relevant one for the discussion of fideism. All right? So he's saying, look, if I really wanted to take Kuyper's perspective, I believe in the virgin birth for reasons, but I believe that 2 and 1 make 3 on faith. There must be something wrong with this. And here we can see, I think, that Kuyper's use is not the relevant one for the discussion of fideism. For consider Shestov. Shestov is an extreme fideist because he thinks faith and reason conflict, and when they do, he says it is reason which must be suppressed. To paraphrase the poem, when faith and reason clash, let reason go to smash. But he is not holding that faith teaches something like 2 and 2 make 5, for example. That conflicts with a belief that 2 and 2 make 4, that one arrives at by reasoning from other propositions. On the contrary, the poignancy of the clash is just that what faith teaches conflicts with immediate teaching of reason, a proposition that is apparently self-evident. On the Kuiperian use of the term, Shestov would be surprised to learn that he is not a fideist after all, for what he takes faith to conflict with here is not something one accepts by reason. That is, on the basis of other propositions. Indeed, on the Kuiperian account, Shestov not only does not qualify as a fideist, he probably qualifies as an anti-fideist. Shestov probably did not recommend taking 2 and 2 equals 5 as basic. He probably held that God proposes this proposition for our belief and that we should therefore accept it. There's a reason, therefore. On the other hand, he also believed, no doubt, that 2 and 2 make 4 is apparently self-evident. So given the Kuiperian use, Shestov would be holding that faith and reason conflict here, but it is 2 plus 2 equaling 4 that is the deliverance of faith, and 2 plus 2 making 5, the deliverance of reason. Since he recommends accepting 2 and 2 making 5, the deliverance of reason, he thus turns out to be a rationalist or anti-fideist, at least on this point. Plantinga is fantastic, man. He doesn't miss a beat. And this shows that Kuyper's use of these terms is not the relevant use. What we take on faith is not simply what we take as basic, and what we accept by reason is not simply what we take on the basis of other propositions. The deliverance of reason include propositions taken as basic, and the deliverance of faith include propositions accepted on the basis of others. The Reformed epistemologist, therefore, is a fideist only if he holds that some central truths of Christianity are not among the deliverances of reason and must instead be taken on faith. That's like Thomas Aquinas, right? Thomas Aquinas thinks we can use reason to get to all sorts of propositions that we know to be true and in agreement with the theologians and the I can't remember the term he uses for it, but the scientists of theology, the religious. But there are other truths that are just revealed to us. They don't conflict with reason. It's just we would never have gotten there if it weren't for revelation. And so we can be reasonable in accepting them and have them too. So there's not really a conflict here. What do they include? First, clearly enough, self-evident propositions and propositions that follow from them by self-evidently valid arguments are among the deliverances of reason. But we cannot stop there. Consider someone who holds that according to correct scientific reasoning from accurate observation, the Earth is at least a couple of billion years old. Nonetheless, he adds, the fact is, it is no more than some 6,000 years old, since that is what faith teaches. Such a person, that person would be a fideist, even though the proposition the earth is more than 6,000 years old is neither self-evident nor a consequence of what is self-evident. So the deliverances of reason include more than the self-evident and its consequences. They also include basic perceptual truths, propositions evident to the senses, incorrigible propositions, certain memory propositions, certain propositions about other minds, and certain moral or ethical propositions. But what about the belief that there is such a person as God and that we are responsible to him? Is that among the deliverances of reason, or is it an item of faith? For Calvin, it is clearly the former. There is within the human mind, and indeed by natural instinct, an awareness of divinity. God himself has implanted in all men a certain understanding of his divine majesty. Men, one and all, perceive that there is a God and he is their maker, unquote. According to Calvin, everyone, whether in the faith or not, has a tendency or nisus in certain situations to apprehend God's existence and to grasp something of his nature and actions. This natural knowledge can be and is suppressed by sin, but the fact remains that a capacity to apprehend God's existence is as much part of our natural noetic equipment as is the capacity to apprehend perceptual truths about the past and truths about other minds, right? That's again, it's like my capacity, my disposition, my capability of having the experience perceptually or with memory or of other minds. That's just like my ability to experience the divine directly to a limited degree in ways that can be suppressed. This natural knowledge can be and is suppressed by sin, but is in fact God's existence, a part of the natural noetic capacity, perceptual truths about the past. Belief in the existence of God is in the same boat as belief in other minds, the past, and perceptual objects. In each case, God has so constructed us that in the right circumstances, we form the belief in question. But then the belief that there is such a person as God is as much among the deliverances of reason as those other beliefs. That's the point of this section here. He's saying there's nothing unreasonable about it, and this is not a fideistic position. Okay? He's not being a person who says, just believe it, and that's okay. He's saying, no, you have grounding, at least. There's nothing unreasonable about this. From this vantage point, we can see, therefore, that the Reformed epistemologist is not a fideist at all with respect to belief in God. He does not hold that there is any conflict between faith and reason here, and he does not even hold that we cannot attain this fundamental truth by reason. He holds instead that it is among the deliverances of reason. Of course, the non-theist may disagree. He may deny that the existence of God is part of the deliverances of reason. A former professor of mine, for whom I had and have enormous respect, once said that theists and non-theists have different conceptions of reason. Ooh, at the time I did not know what he meant, but now I think I do. On the Reformed view I have been urging, the deliverances of reason include the existence of God as much as perceptual truths, self-evident truths, memory truths, and the like. It is not that theist and non-theist agree as to what reason delivers. The theist then going on to accept the existence of God by faith, there is instead disagreement in the first place as to what are the deliverances of reason. But then the Reformed epistemologist is no more a fideist with respect to belief in God than is, for example, Thomas Aquinas. Like the latter, he will no doubt hold that there are other truths of Christianity that are not to be found in the deliverances of reason. Such truths, for example, as that God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself. But he is not a fideist by virtue of his views on our knowledge of God. By way of summary, I have argued that the evidentialist objection All right, so let's pause there before we read the last paragraph. His view here is that believing that God exists does not require faith. It also doesn't require you to argue to something from other things that you also know. Maybe you could argue to it also. Isn't that nice? We can have superfluous arguments that prove something, but you can just immediately experience it in a way that could be appropriate and acceptable for you to say, it's just my life. I'm just living with a soda can in my hand and I can't not perceive it. It's just true that I have this memory and no reason to think my memory is flawed or perverted in some way that I had breakfast this morning. It's just true that when I see you holding your ankle with a bone sticking out of it, I feel like, oh my gosh, I must help this person who is in pain. I don't have evidence for it. It's just I know what I know, and I can't escape feeling that way. And likewise, sometimes I just sort of feel guilty for what I did because I know he's not happy with me. What? I can't not think that. That's what it means for me to be, and so it's not unreasonable, and it doesn't require faith. I'm just properly accepting it as a reasonable thing to think, but I'm still open to arguments, and you could give me arguments that I'm wrong, but until you do, it's properly basic. By way of summary, I have argued that the evidentialist objection to theistic belief is rooted in classical foundationalism. The same can be said. So the evidentialist objection to theistic belief is rooted in classical foundationalism. So this is really the crux of this whole paper. Is pretty powerful epistemologically, not even just theologically. It's like he's saying there's two ways of thinking about reason and what it can deliver us. And I'm saying there's three parts. There's grounding, there's properly basic stones, and then there's stuff you build on top of it. Some people are not going to like that. They've got a classical foundationalism. The same can be said for the Thomistic conception of faith and reason. Classical foundationalism is attractive and seductive. In the final analysis, however, it turns out to be both false and self-referentially incoherent. Furthermore, the Reformed objection to natural theology, unformed and inchoate as it is, may best be seen as a rejection of classical foundationalism. As the Reformed thinker sees things, being self-evident or incorrigible or evident to the senses is not a necessary condition of proper basicality. He goes on to add that belief in God is properly basic. He is not thereby committed to the idea that just any or nearly any belief is properly basic, even if he lacks a criterion for proper basicality, nor is he committed to the view that argument is irrelevant to belief in God if such belief is properly basic. Furthermore, belief in God, like other properly basic beliefs, is not groundless or arbitrary. It is grounded in justification conferring conditions. Finally, the Reformed view that belief in God is properly basic is not Why am I losing my capacity to pronounce big words? I never had that problem before.
Go for it.
Don't get older, children, or do get older, but felicitously thought of as a version of fideism. It's not a version of fideism. Felicitously. It's very simple. Felicitously. Maybe I need to start having a better diet. My brain is losing capacity. Felicitously thought of as a version of fideism. It is not that. Okay, wow. We just got to the end of that essay, and I have to say this, we should just be reading this in the epistemology class as well. It's important, I think, to understand how limited his argument is here, right? He's not claiming a whole bunch of things that people might think he is. If you hear the title, Plantinga is coming to talk to us today on how it is properly basic to believe in God, you might think he means, it's properly basic to pray to him, and it's properly basic to well, okay, maybe some of those in certain contexts. Yes, that's the definition. Sorry, there. Okay, but what he's saying is that I don't even have to have a full definition of what makes something properly basic to know that it's more than just things that are perceptively inescapable, incorrigible, based in memory, models of other persons that I also can't escape. The belief in God could be properly basic, and here's why. That doesn't mean that it's divorced from reason. It doesn't mean that you can't give me reasonable arguments to suppose it is not grounded properly, which is different than supported by other arguments properly. It's not the case that I couldn't be shown a logical inconsistency between two things that I'm taking that way and then have to give one of them up. And it's not a faith position. It's not a position which says just believe and belief is better than reason. It's something related to, and it seems like he's not really giving us a definition. And we've been in this discussion trying to figure out what his definition is. He might just not exactly be giving one, but it's something to do with disposition. He's used that word twice. I saw that in there, and it has something to do with I can't experience the world except in this way, and you haven't yet given me reasons to say that that's because I'm broken in some way or there's something unreliable about my being in the world. Because you have to be in the right conditions. Person S has to be in condition C, which is the condition which makes it appropriate for him to say that proposition P is properly basic. So there's all sorts of qualifiers around it, and it's not Jesus Christ is Lord that's properly basic. It's just the belief in the divine is properly basic, and then everything else, like, is the Bible reliable, or what about this problem? Like, all of that we're coming to through reason, and reason sort of encompasses even our properly basic beliefs, not because we're arguing to them, but because we can be given reasons to try to figure out how to supplant their grounding. There seems to be a contradiction there, but maybe he escapes that by not giving a definition of what would be properly grounding.
So let me see if this fits. So the disposition to enjoy the video part of a video call is for vision to work, to not be blind, basically, to be capable of sight.
Yes, yeah,
That's
sure.
the disposition to enjoy the video part of a video call.
And while you're watching it, the screen is presenting itself to you in a video call kind of way, which you find inescapable.
Yeah.
So you have the disposition and the capacity to experience it, and it is making itself felt on you in a way that you can't argue away from.
Though I know about at least one scientist who worked with non-ocular vision with children especially, and he said that it worked with children because their sense of self wasn't so formed, so crystallized.
Are these blind children?
Not all of them. Some of them were blindfolded, and it turns out that if a person's ego isn't so formed as happens with young children, they might still be trainable to hone their capacity to see, not with any conventional senses that we have, but with the very so-called neural field that is generated by the nervous system, especially the brain, which supposedly interacts with some fundamental structure of the universe, like a lattice or something that he describes. And so imagine that.
So he's not saying that they're making pictures in their mind from other sensory input. He's saying it's not sensory input at all.
Yeah, exactly. Not sensory input through all these conventional senses. So if someone develops a way to perceive the world that tells them God is a thing and God exists, who are we to say propositionally that this person is crazy? We can't say it. It's out of bounds. Imagine if the entirety of humanity were blind and only one person would see. Would any of the population that is blind,
I think that's true,
would have any argument to say, oh, you're not seeing red? It couldn't.
Right. He also probably couldn't communicate to you what it was like to see red either.
Yeah, or see the stars and whatnot, everything, of all forms and colors and shapes and textures, visually, etc. All this realm of experience, very diverse. It would be very, very, very difficult to communicate to the rest of the people. And maybe it's a bit like this with really genuine prophets. that experience something, probably not using even their conventional senses, maybe using something like these kids in this experience developed, and they saw or experienced or felt or whatever something that's completely atypical, non-ordinary, that gave them teachings, gave them some lessons that they could figure out how to pass on to his fellow humans who didn't see anything. And beyond that, it's even having value for the society, literally resulting in some kind of code of conduct or whatever that actually benefits nations. Those
are possible. If a person was in such a position, it would not be unreasonable for them to take certain things as properly basic. Okay? So if it's, let's say, a tetrachromatic person, somebody who says, I know the colors of the rainbow that you're talking about, but I see 3 other colors in addition to that. Well, okay, I don't have to believe you, but I could find evidence to believe you. That doesn't matter. The question is it properly basic for you to say, I am perceiving this color, right? You're just perceiving it. Like, you can live according to that. You could maybe write a little, colorblind test for the rest of us that we all fail, but that you can actually write messages to other tetrachromatic people in or something like that. So we can find evidence that you're right. And if you are right, we can say, well, I'm made in such a way that I don't perceive those colors. You're made in such a way that you do, and I have reasons for that. But when you're perceiving the color, that's just properly basic for you. You don't need reasons. You're just having the experience. Unless somebody can give you reasons that you've been deceived or under an illusion or something like that. It's still, we can still unground, it seems, or remove from the grounding, or smash to pieces something that we thought was grounded. He thinks reason is still judge even in that realm, which is why that's part of his argument for why he's not arguing for a fideistic license to believe in God.
Okay, I think we need to pursue moderation and how should we say it? Reliability in whatever epistemological system we construct. And I think we should not be foolish to dismiss face value, dismiss revelation and mysticism, non-sensory perception, etc. We shouldn't dismiss these too eagerly and stick with the prepackaged scientific kit of epistemology.
In our own lives, we shouldn't. I think you're also, this is okay. I think this is a good way to end this, since it ends in 2 minutes. I like the story in the New Testament where Paul goes to the Greeks and he says, let me tell you about the unknown God. And then the text says there were 3 responses to him. The first were a small group maybe, but a group who said, oh my gosh, we believe you. Let us follow you. And you have the truth. And now we have the truth. We're on Team Paul. There was another group, small perhaps, I don't know, who mocked him. You believe in resurrection and ha, 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 what a dummy. We're so much smarter than you and we mock you and blah, blah, blah. But then there was a third group who took him seriously, but wanted to hear more, right? And I think that you don't get to call yourself a philosopher if you write off people because they're coming to you with a potential truth. If you're a pursuer of the truth, you don't think you own the truth. And if somebody else comes in saying, I own the truth, here it is, and you say, no, you don't, I'm not listening, well, you're not a pursuer of the truth. They could be right. They could accidentally be right. Aren't you interested? Like, you can't be in the mocking group. Maybe you can't be in the following group. Maybe you can. I don't know. But you certainly can't be in the mocking group and be a philosopher. I think that is a really important point, is to say the philosophers don't say religious people, nothing they say is something I'll think about. It's like, they could be right. You're not right. You're trying to figure out what's right. So find reasons why they're wrong, fine. But you don't get to just say, haha, I'm a philosopher. I don't listen to people like that. It's like, well, they're talking about truth. I thought that's what you cared about. So that's a nice note to end on, I think. And all the notes have been really nice.